Roya Hakakian was born and raised in a Jewish family in Tehran. When the 1979 Iranian Revolution started, anti-Semitism spread, and her family were granted political asylum in the U.S., ultimately settling in New York. She has written several books about Iran, including her critically acclaimed memoir called Journey from the Land of No.
She has thought deeply about her homeland and has written extensively on it. Her expertise on Iranian women is unparalleled. Now that Iran is capturing headlines for its intensifying battles with Israel, we thought we would turn to her to get her unique take. Today, she's public scholar at the Moynihan Center at City College in New York City. Welcome, Roya.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's just start in general terms. Can you paint a picture of where you see Iran right now? Obviously, there's a lot of tensions within the country as well as internationally. What's your general take on where the country stands right now?
Well, I think the clerics in Iran are hugely surprised and shocked. I think they have simply gotten used to the notion that they can carry out various attacks, whether through their proxies or through their various arms in Europe against Iranian dissidents and so on, and not really experience any retaliation in response. And the attacks that Israel has conducted against Iran, whether it was the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran a couple of months ago, to the getting rid of a couple of, or several, Iranian IRGC members in Syria, and then finally the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah has shocked Iran because Israel has given Iran the response that it hadn't expected. And I think while the nation on the inside is extremely terrified and worried about the future, at the same time, the impasse seems to be about to break, and perhaps they can hope for a different sort of future as a result of this confrontation.
Yeah, we've always, hoped that there will be some groundswell of opposition to the regime there. Of course, this gets into this difficult territory where, many authoritarian regimes around the world have gotten, more effective at staying in power, even versus very widespread popular discontentment. What is the sentiment among the people in Iran to have any hope toward moving toward a more democratic or modern society in accordance with what the people actually wish for?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think two facts are indisputable. One is that the reform movement in Iran began in 1997, and everyone around the world, including the Iranian diaspora and certainly the nation within, was incredibly hopeful that it can be the beginning of a major transformation in Iran. 26 years has passed since the start of the reform movement, and nothing has changed. That's fact number one. Fact number two is that the containment policy that the United States and the West have pursued with Iran has not only not worked, but really empowered Iran. The more the U.S. has tried to de-escalate and not respond to Iran, and the same goes for the West, the more powerful Iran seems to have become, whether it's through the propping up of Bashar Assad in Syria, or feeding and fueling the war in Lebanon through its proxies, Hezbollah, or Hamas and Yemen, and all these other actors. Iran seems to have simply benefited from the notion of the containment policy. So one cannot help but wonder, can a real response, which Israel has shown in the past month or so, change this configuration and force Iran to either accept defeat and come to accept the idea that it needs to back off, or a further so-called escalation or response on behalf of Israel and the West will weaken the regime in Tehran and allow the internal movement, which we saw take place in 2022 in response to the killing of Mahsa Amini in September of 2022 rise up again and then do hopefully its magic and deliver a final knock and blow to the regime.
But
That's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, but let me just push back on that a little, Roya, and that you're the expert on these matters. But isn't there a danger that if the goal or the objective that you would like to see is internal change within Iran, isn't there a danger that that would actually be put off or delayed if the nation at large felt under attack either from Israel or from the United States? Doesn't that risk actually fostering a sort of knee-jerk defense, not so much of the regime per se, but the regime as emblematic of a nation under attack from enemies?
Right. I would have entirely agreed with you if this were 1989 or 1990, when the regime in Iran was somewhat new. The revolution was in its 10th year. But this is 46 years later. And every time the internal population in Iran, the public, has risen up to demand a change, whether it was a student movement in 1999 or the several rising up of the women throughout the years, most recently in 2022, we have seen nothing but the regime responding with an iron fist, arresting, executing, and basically dispersing the protesters into the West and into exile. So I think what may have been true, that any sort of serious response would have galvanized the Iranians against forces from without. By this point, the people are simply looking to see some kind of change, some kind of force that will change this equation that is not going in any direction, to perhaps force the regime, whether it's through an uprising inside Iran or the pressure of the diaspora community, to transform in one way or another. A few years ago, when the Trump administration assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC in Iran, we heard all over the place that Iranians would galvanize against the United States as a result of this. That didn't happen. And every time since then, we have heard this scenario be repeated. And it has not happened, partially because the regime has failed after 40 plus years to respond to the needs of the public in even the smallest way, including the fact that women demanded the eradication of the morality police. And even that small request has not been answered. So I would say no.
How can we, though, assuage concerns about a broader war now spilling out between Israel and Iran, one that will end up involving the U.S., as much as in an ideal world we would like to see certainly a more friendly, more tolerant, more modern regime in Iran. We don't want, global catastrophe in order to get there. That's not going to be acceptable to U.S. interests. So how does that, with showing enough restraint while also being morally supportive, certainly, of things improving in Iran without going to war with the country, which, no one here is willing to do.
Right. And I don't think that anybody inside Iran wants the United States, Israel, or any foreign power to do the job of internal transformation. Again, I have to go back to my initial point. Containment hasn't worked. And we know from the history of the past 25 years that Iran has simply benefited and been empowered by being left alone. And its chief ally, Russia, has also been a beneficiary of the so-called containment policy. So what the West could potentially do at this moment is, if Israel is about to respond to Iran, allow some of the military targets to be attacked by Israel. Perhaps the facilities that the missiles and the drones and the very many weaponry that Iran has been using, whether to supply the Russians or to attack Israel with, to be attacked and targeted. And perhaps that can deliver a message to Iran. It can weaken perhaps a sense of confidence that the regime has had, that no matter what it does, the West will not dare to respond. And then, let's think about a Yugoslavia scenario where, the NATO attacked Milosevic, and it took about a year and a half, but the internal movement started to bubble up and finally remove Milosevic from power. I would like to hope, although there is no guarantee, that this can happen within Iran. And the entire region can be freed of the clutch of Hezbollah, which has taken Syria, Lebanon into its grip and has turned both of them into failed states. And that could potentially be a major transformation, not just for Israel, but for the region at large.
Roya Hakakian, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.